Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. In this demonstration I'll be using this photo as a reference. I downloaded it from Unsplash and I'll put a link in the description below. What attracted me was the way the waves have been captured, but I just thought the sky a little plain, so I'll probably alter that slightly. Composition is pretty good with the lone surfer as the focal point. Again, the sea's a little too green for me, so I'll tone that down slightly. Always remember that changing things from the reference is all about the artist's job in interpreting a scene rather than slavishly copying it. Your reaction to a scene is far more important than trying to make an exact copy. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with the sky, and I'm going to mix up some cobalt blue, fairly strong mix, fair amount of water. I'm not going to wet the paper first. I want to fade the sky from quite a bright blue at the top to almost nothing on the horizon. With variation as I go down the page, just adding a little bit of cerulean to the mix. Don't think it'll make that much difference. I'm just mixing some cobalt teal here to blend around halfway down from the top of the sky to the horizon, just to add a bit more of the green to the sky. It'll hardly be noticeable because both colours are going to blend together once I get started. The reason I'm not adding water to not wetting the page first is I don't want to dilute the mix. Already I've realised it's not quite strong enough, so just a bit more pigment. Just establish the dark at the top. This is going to dry much lighter. I'm just going to add this cobalt teal in the middle, and they'll blend together on the paper. For those of you interested, this is a Raphael Soft Aqua No. 2 mop. I love these brushes. They hold a lot of water and they're very easy to use. The paper I'm using is a Bockinford block of 300 gram rough white paper. I've taped the sides. I don't need to, but I always tape the sides to create a white border. What I'm doing here is just trying to blend things so that the sky almost disappears. Let's see if I need any more. Just add a bit more of the cobalt teal and just darken up the sky a little bit. As I say, it's going to dry much lighter, so I can afford to be quite dark at the top. But I want to create this idea of aerial perspective. The sky closer to you always looks darker than the sky on a horizon. I'm just going to take off any excess water. I don't want any runbacks. Here I'm going to take out some wispy clouds. I saw a sky like this the other day and I thought it would look quite attractive, and it just breaks up the sky, and also the angle I've painted these clouds is going to help with the final composition once I paint the where the sea meets the beach. I'm just going to dab out with a piece of kitchen towel just to soften the edges, break up so that it's more wispy as it gets closer to us. And again on the horizon, just feather it out a little bit with some clean kitchen towel. What I'm going to do now is mix some more of that cobalt teal with the cobalt blue, and I'm just adding a touch of sap green for the lightest light of the sea. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll see that I advocate painting from the lightest light to the darkest dark, wherever possible. Obviously with the sky I started with the darker blue, but generally speaking, look for the lightest lights, get those in first with the first wash, which is what I'm doing now. I'm just putting some clean water across the bottom of the horizon, so that when I start painting the sea below it, it will bleed into it and blend more readily and still have quite a light edge to the horizon, and hopefully there won't be a hard edge, it'll be soft once it's dry. Okay, that looks okay. Just take a little bit out with the dry brush, a damp brush I should say. What I'm doing here is I'm putting the lightest wash of the sea in, leaving gaps where the waves are breaking, wherever I can see them. As I come further down the page, the white crests of the waves have become more apparent. But this is the initial wash. It's going to be the lightest colour that you'll see in the sea once it's dry. I've gone over the figure, it doesn't matter, I'll lift that out in a second with a damp brush, but I could leave it because the figure's going to be quite dark. It's a very dark grey, almost black wetsuit he's wearing, so it won't really show, but doesn't take a sec to lift out any colour. Here I'm just dabbing with the brush just to create the idea of where the wave is foaming up as it hits the shore. I'm just going to paint the water that's left by the receding waves at the top of the waterline. This is the area that quite often, as waves come in and then they recede, the top is left quite wet and reflective, so that's what I've just put in. And just at the front where the waves are frothing as they hit the shore, just adding a little bit of the lightest light. I'm just going to lift out this, where as I said, where I painted over the surfer with a damp brush. As I say, I don't really need to do this, but it just keeps it clean for me. It's a personal thing. Okay, I'm just going to mix up some raw sienna, and I'm going to add some lavender to that. Trying to create a colour that suggests the dampest part of the sand as the waves recede, just below where I've just painted the water at the top of the where the waves hit. So just getting some lavender. As you can see, that it takes the warmth out of the yellow of the raw sienna, and just gives it that greyish look, grey-green, of very wet sand, just where the waves are hitting the shore. Carefully painting around the surfboard. That's going to be bright yellow, so I really want to keep the white of the paper for that. Again, trying to paint around the surf fairly carefully. As I say, it doesn't matter about the wetsuit, but I like to keep a hard edge there if I can. I'm just scumbling this in. I'm not looking for a particularly smooth wash, because you do get quite a variation in shades where the water sinks into the sand at different speeds, so you do get a variation. Just lifting out a little bit for where the sand is further away. The further away it'll appear lighter, and I'm trying to make sure that that fits in with the aerial perspective of dark closer to us, lighter as you get further away. I'm just softening that edge with a damp brush into the blue of the sea water at the top of the where the wave hits. Don't want a hard edge there. And again at the shoreline, just softening it a little bit. There will be a few hard edges, but I'll be painting those in later. Just darkening this wet area. Dried a bit light for me, and again adding a little bit of the sandy mix into the blue, just to create a bit of variation. You really don't want the colour to be all the same all the way along. Just going to lift that out. That's too dark. That's better. Just lifting out a little bit with a damp brush, just to create some suggestion of different shades. You'll hardly notice this, but when it dries you'll probably see it better. I'm going to add some yellow ochre to the same mix, just to warm up the sand colour for the sand at the top of the beach, where the water hasn't quite reached. It's damp because obviously water seeps through, but it's not as damp as the where the waves are hitting. I'm using an Escoda brush here, and I've picked up a brush that's a little bit too small, but it doesn't really matter. It's not a massive painting, so I can get away with it. If it was a bigger painting, I would be changing brushes, but for the sake of this small area, this smaller brush doesn't matter. These Escoda Perla brushes are lovely brushes to use. They retain their springiness, they hold water very well, and maintain a really nice point when you want to do some detail work. Okay, I've let that dry and I'm back now, and I've just mixed up the darkest darks for the sea. I'm going to start putting in the darker areas now. At this point, this is the ugly point of the painting where nothing seems to look right. But once you start putting the darks in, it'll all start to come together. These are where the waves are breaking. As you can see, I've toned down the greenness of the sea a little bit because in the photograph it was very green, and I wanted it to be have a bit more blue in the mix. Just so you know, this is the colour I've mixed up is cobalt blue, a very small touch of Payne's grey, which has a blue tint to it, and a tiny amount of sap green just to add to the greenness. I'm just painting in where the waves are rolling over, leaving the crest areas white, using the white of the paper. And I will go back over these with the same colour just to make sure that there's plenty of pigment while they're still wet. You don't do this if the painting is beginning to dry too much, because you need to have a lot more pigment on your brush. Wet into wet's fine, but wet into damp doesn't really work very well. So just a question of keep going with this. As I say, I will keep adding more darks to where the darkest shadow of the waves breaking appear. Darkest shadows appear, I should say. And just under where the crests are rolling over, there's always a little bit of shadow. Break it up, don't draw a nice neat line. Nature's not like that. What I'm doing here is I've just put some clean water on my brush and then cleaned it on my kitchen towel, just so that it's a damp brush, and I'm just blending into the lightest light those darker areas, trying to follow the shape of the wave a little bit where the water slopes. Again, trying to keep the brush just damp, not too wet. Again, I'm using the reference photograph as a guide. I don't want to slavishly copy the photograph, but the wave formation in the picture is pretty good, so I'm trying to keep it as close as possible without it being a total replication of the photograph. You see, I'm still darkening up where those waves are breaking over, and I'll keep going with that until I feel that it's the right value. At the moment it's still a little bit light, so I may add some more darker tint to that shortly. Just darkening some of the areas of the sea between the wave crests. Again, trying to keep it blended. The paper's still very wet, so I can get away with using fairly wet mix into this darker area. few patches of darker sea at the top of the crest. I'm just going to push the brush down quite hard. These brushes take a fair bit of hammer, so it just creates the idea of light froth where the waves are actually hitting the shore. I'm just going to add a touch more of the Payne's grey just to get the darkest shadows where the waves are breaking. Just trying to get my tonal values right here, so bear with me. Because the paint on the paper is still wet, these darker areas are blending nicely down the page. I've got my board at an angle of about 30 degrees, so gravity helps with these darks blending a little bit. I want them to be dark at the very top, but to just blend down, just to show the definition of how the waves are breaking. I think I've laboured that point now, so just putting a few darker areas where the water's right at the edge of the beach. Again, just putting some darker splashes where the sea is foaming up as it hits the sand. Okay, I've let that dry now, so and clean my palette. I'm mixing up some of the same mix I had before, the raw sienna and some lavender. I'm also going to mix some yellow ochre, which I will use with the other mix to blend together for the sand at the top. So that, on the edge where the water is, I want it to be that damp green colour that I used earlier for the sand for nearer to the sea. I'm just putting it in there. I want a little bit of a hard edge against the water. Just soften it into the rest of the sand, and then have the yellow ochre to warm it up and darken it so that the sand nearer to us appears darker, and as it recedes it gets slightly lighter and less warm. Cool colours tend to recede, warm colours tend to appear closer to us. It's all part of aerial perspective. I'm just going to mix up some pretty strong Payne's grey, this fairly thick mixture for the surfer's wetsuit and his hair. Let's put the hair in first, define the head, leave a little bit of a gap for the neck, and then the wetsuit. You know, people often ask me why I call this channel Think Watercolour. When I set the channel up, I wanted the word watercolour in the title so that people knew what the channel was about, and lots of names were taken. And the one thing I always advocate is that you think about what you're going to paint before you paint, hence the name Think Watercolour. But basically what I always advocate is, before you even start to paint, have a look at what you want to achieve. What reaches you from the image you're trying to paint? What is it that makes you want to paint it? And then think about the lightest lights and the darkest darks. I sometimes do a tonal sketch just to confirm in my head, or confirm what's in my head about a scene that I'm about to paint. Don't always do it, but every now and then I will do a tonal sketch, and it just helps to concentrate the mind. Again, it makes you think about what you're doing. Same applies to when you're mixing colour. If you think about what you're trying to achieve with a colour, and practice and try different colour combinations out, you will eventually have an arsenal of colours that you know in your head you can mix fairly easily. What I've done here with the wetsuit is just darken the shaded areas and lift it out a little bit for where the light's hitting the right hand side of the surfer. It helps to loosely delineate the shape of the body and the way the legs are moving. But don't be too hard on yourself with things like this. A few brush strokes are all you need to suggest that there's somebody there. Don't have to go into loads of detail. Just painting in the surface shadow here, because that's going to help finish the painting off and give it some life. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's a sandy beach after all, so it's not going to be the same as a shadow on a piece of concrete. So keep it loose, keep it simple. Just mixing up some yellow ochre with some burnt sienna. I'm going to just put in some of the old footprints and marks in the sand where people have walked before, earlier in the day perhaps. A few footprints here and there, a few indentations. The trick is not to go overboard with this sort of thing. I will add a darker shadow around the edges of these indentations just to add depth to the painting. And where the surf has been walking, it's the dampest part of the beach, so you'll see a slight shadow where the indentations are, but not as distinct as the indentations on the drier sand. Just adding some of the darker shadows where the frothing water's hitting the sand. Doesn't need too much, just enough to give the painting some depth. A few darker bits of paint in the froth. Dab it out with a finger, always helps. Again, the trick is not to get too fiddly with things like this. It's foam after all, and I think you can see once the paint dries it will look as I intended. It's these darker touches that really bring the painting alive. The shadows where the waves are breaking, the surface shadow, the footprints in the sand, and as I say, I'm going to add to those shortly. Just put a bit of shadow around the edge. Give them a more three-dimensional look. Doesn't take much, just a few little brush strokes. Straight away they look more three-dimensional. Again, don't be too fussy. You only have to hint at things like this, and the eye will do the rest. A few dots and dabs of bits of flotsam on the shore. Now for the flesh tones, I'm mixing Windsor Red and Windsor Yellow. And you're going to say, well, that's going to be miles too strong. In actual fact, reds in particular tend to dry much, much lighter. Start with the neck, which that will join the head to the body. This arm is in the shade, and I'll be darkening this quite substantially, so the whole arm is in the shade. The other arm is less so, so I will be adding shadow to parts of it, but for the time being let's just get the base flesh tone on. Same with the legs. So you don't have to paint every detail, you have to paint the feet, but they're in the sand anyway, so just one leg longer than the other, and straight away the guy's walking. For the surfboard I'm using almost straight out of the tube Windsor yellow. The surfboard has a red stripe down the middle which is faded slightly because that's where the surfer rubs wax on it, and you end up with quite light patches in the centre of the board. Being quite careful with this because I want to make sure that the board has some substance to it. I'll just with some clear water just blend the yellow in. The board's much lighter at this end where it's in the light. Just add a little bit of that flesh tone into the yellow just to create a sort of shadowy area on the board. Okay, I've let the board dry because I didn't want to start painting the red because that would have bled straight into the yellow. So just put some, again, Windsor red, pretty neat, straight from the tube almost, very thick paint. Then blend it so that it gets lighter where the surfer will have rubbed wax on his board. Same this side. When you're painting figures, if they're a long way away, you don't have to go into a great deal of detail, but the closer they are to you, the more you have to think about how they're going to look. So taking a little bit more time with this than I would if he was much further away. At the end of the day, he's the focal point of the painting, so I need it to look correct without being over laboured. Just going to add a little bit of black, well, sorry, I should say a little bit of fairly neat Payne's grey for the ankle strap. The surfers have to hang on to the board when they come off so they don't lose it. Just a few marks to suggest the ankle strap. You don't have to go into any detail. At this distance it really doesn't matter. Just touching up the edge of the wetsuit there. I'll let that dry, and just adding a little bit of blue, cobalt blue, to the flesh mix for the shadow. You add the blue, it creates this sort of maroon colour, which is ideal for a shadow. The whole of that arm is in shadow, so that's easy to do. A few flicks of paint on this arm, just on the underside and the hand. Left hand side of each leg, just a little bit of shadow. Just add a bit more blue to make that shadow stronger at the bottom there. Same with that arm. Just a touch on the neck. Just a little bit of shadow under his arm on the board itself. What I'm doing here, I've got some fairly neat white gouache straight out of the tube with a damp brush, just to add a little bit of white to the foam where I lost some of that earlier. And it just a few dabs. Don't go over the top. You really don't need a lot of this. You know, I could have used masking fluid, but I'm not a great lover of masking fluid. You get pretty hard edges with it, and you can't always guarantee that what you've masked out comes out exactly how you wanted it. A few lines, wipe them off over with a finger just to spread them into the sand. Just suggestion of reflection, just to finish the painting off, really. And I guess we're done. I hope you enjoyed watching this demonstration. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell if you'd like to see more demonstrations like this. I apologise for waffling a little bit, but painting and speaking at the same time is a new skill I'm trying to acquire. Do give the video a like if you liked it, and thanks again for watching.